Call to order the meeting of the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Citizen Advisory Board. We'll start with introductions.
Bobby and Lee, Citizens Advisory Board.
Alan Burnett, Cab.
Shirley Lanier, Citizens Advisory Board.
Dave Dollins, Department of Energy.
Ryan.
You do it? I was going to introduce Reinhard Canary, who was here last month. He can introduce himself, but he's going to be he's a new site lead for DOE, and it really functions. If you're wondering what a site lead is, it functions in a lot of ways like the site managers we've had located at the site in the past. So he's quite capable, and I know he'll be a great help to the program.
Rhonda Smith, Citizen Advisory Board.
Steve Kay with Robertson Kay, facilitator for the board.
David Williams, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Jim Smart, CEB. John Maybrook, Kentucky Division of Waste Management.
Tim Creer, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources.
John Russell, Cab.
Kim Crenshaw, EHI.
Gary Vander Boegh. My turn. Ron Fowler.
Tommy Willow. Sir. Your name? Warren Smith. Thank you. John Kelly, Energy Solutions. Butch Daniels, PRS.
Paul Murphie, Energy Solutions.
Introduce yourself. It's your turn.
Bruce Gardner.
You have to stand up, Bruce.
George Johnson. Dr. Clinton Cook, GMIN Oncology.
Brian Begley, Kentucky Division of Waste Management.
Nicole Burpo, Division Waste Management.
Steve Miners, Tricord Incorporated.
Bruce Phillips, Environmental Research Institute.
Barry Tilden, UBS. Scott Smith, Swift and Center. Bill Clark, Kentucky Division of Waste Management.
Peter Republic.
Ruby English, Neighbor, and
Larry Souter, Kentucky Division of Water, PPPO branch.
Human Rights, DCS branch.
John Razor, PRS.
John Morgan, PRS.
Tracy Brantley, PRS.
Joe Tarantino, PRS.
Ernest Whitehead, Coalition for Health.
Jeannie Branstetter, EHI.
Okay, welcome, everybody. You should have a proposed agenda in front of you. Are there any suggestions for modifications to the agenda before we adopt it?
One of the things on the site management plan presentation, that will not be tonight. I talked to Rhonda about that a few days ago. We're expecting the regulator comments in probably mid-September, and so it might be premature to try to go out and have a large presentation on the site management plan, and in all fairness to them, they've not completed their review. So maybe wait.
Hold it
I'd
again?
hold it another, yeah.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
All right. Are there any other proposed changes for the agenda? Any objections to adopting the agenda as modified? Hearing none, that's adopted by consensus. Should have the July minutes in your packet. Are there any corrections for the July minutes?
I just received them. We get them when we come in the door, and then I was in the meeting next door, and I haven't had a chance to review them, so I don't know if I have any corrections right now.
We'll,
Maybe come back to,
if you read, and if you find something, we'll
All right.
come back to it. Anybody else? Any other corrections? Any objections to approving these minutes as submitted with the proviso that John might have might want to come back? Hearing none, they'll be approved by consensus. Go to the DDFO's comments. Okay, that's you.
Yeah. Okay, what you see here in front of you is the C402 Limehouse demolition. This is showing the facilities coming down. I think we showed you a partial clip last month, and you get to go ahead and see how they get all the way through the end of completing that demolition activity. there you can see them loading some of the rubble into roll-off containers, and that's the slab that was left remaining after the demolition activities were complete. And you can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, and they're planning to complete the rubble removal here this week, and they have completed the sampling activities out at the C405 incinerator in preparation for D&D of that facility. Work instructions are currently being written, and we are received comments from Kentucky regarding our removal action work plan, and are having discussions with the EPA as we wait for their written comments. Sampling on the 746A West End smelter is scheduled to start next week. Go ahead and next slide, please. The DOE material storage areas, again, we're on target to meet our characterization milestone of the priority B DMSAs. 10 of the 11 are complete, and we have characterized 73 of the total 160 original DMSAs. There were 2,596 cubic feet of materials that were characterized, including sampling activities during July. This brings the total to approximately 664,000 cubic feet of total estimated volume that's been characterized. 855,000 cubic feet, or the estimated total volume to be characterized. Over 5,000 cubic feet of material were packaged for disposal in July, and over 7,000 cubic feet of material were disposed during July. Of the approximately 335,000 cubic feet have been disposed since the project began. The activities over the next 60 days do include completion of the Priority B DMSAs and initiating finer closure certification for approximately 20 DMSAs in accordance with our agreed order, and we are looking at transitioning to rail shipments for our waste disposal activities to take advantage of some economies of scale. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, you can see this little animation. Keep going. Okay, what you see here is the south end of the C400 facility, and the slide shows locations of the 47 sampling points. This is for the C400 interim remedial action. The blue dots, squares, represent samples to the Upper Continental recharge system, so that's roughly 55 feet deep. And then the red squares are the for the bottom samples, and that's down between 95 and 100 feet. It's supposed to be down to the bottom of the RGA. Next slide, please. Okay, in this video, you do see operator making a hole for the sampling activity. In the a remedial design support investigation is required by the record of decision. Essentially what's happening here is we're able to get better information to roadmap the TCE around the C400 facility, and they're scheduled to complete this particular activity by the end of August. Okay, go ahead. What we have here is a pictorial of a probe. This is a device called a membrane interface probe. It's about 2.5 inches in diameter and uses a direct push technology. It has been used here at Paducah before, but it's only been used for shallower depths. It goes ahead and it essentially pushes the probe to depth using a hydraulic hammer, and this is done in lieu of drilling. There's a 1.5-inch diameter pre-probe, and that's pushed into the ground first, essentially clearing the way for the actual probe itself, okay, which is more delicate, and that pre-probe is what's pushed into the ground with the hydraulic hammer. Because there's no removal of any core, there's no process waste, which results in less cost, and it's more efficient for us. Bruce, did we bring a... No, we didn't have one? Okay. Go ahead to the next slide. The Duff 6 conversion project, essentially they have been working on the Bio Creek Railroad Bridge. They've installed some surge rock, some geotextile fabric, sun ballast, and they've gone ahead and hooked it up to the site rail line. They've done some grading and seeding and mulching on the side slopes, and so they are also in the process of installing some of the rail line. The photo that you do see there in front of you is the conversion facility. It's 40% complete with the installation of the panels. That project is expected to be completed in October. The warehouse building is complete, and they're working on the interior of the administration building, and that's projected to be complete in October. Go ahead to the next slide. There you can see them working on the rail spur, installing a piece of rail, and there's another photo of the conversion facility where they're actually lowering a panel into place. Okay, the northwest scrap corner, we're rapidly approaching the completion of that project. There are approximately 200 tons remaining on the ground. There are nearly 60 rail cars loaded on site with more than 4,000 tons that are pending shipment. This brings us to more than 23,000 tons of scrap metal that have been shipped to date. 27,000 when we ship that 4,000 tons that are loaded. I think the most recent shipment was June 23rd. That was a shipment of 3,200 tons. Go ahead, next slide. Looking at the breakdown of what we have completed in the various yards, you can see of the 200 tons that are remaining, there are approximately 20 tons remaining in the E1 yard, and then the rest of the 180 tons remain in the C1 yard. Go ahead. Moving on to the D&D, the C410, 420 facility. They've gone ahead and started removing some of the utility piping in that facility. They've completed removal of the bus works from zones 42 and 43 in Sector 2. They've removed 108 large electrical switches from those two zones. Those have been shipped to Toxco, and they're preparing to actually make those shipments. There's about 25,000 pounds of copper that will be sent to Toxco for reuse. They are continuing to repackage loose debris and wastes. They've packaged 14,000 cubic feet, which was put into 19 intermodals or C-lands. An intermodal is roughly 20 by 8 by 5 feet, and a C-land would be 20 by 8 by 10. Additionally, there were 20 intermodals of debris that were shipped to Energy Solutions in July, and they've begun developing work packages to begin asbestos abatement and in support of that utility piping and equipment demolition. The utility piping that they are removing would include air lines, water lines, nitrogen lines, electrical lines, and steam lines. For our legacy waste disposition project, they have shipped roughly 460 cubic feet of mixed low-level waste to Energy Solutions. They've shipped another 760 cubic feet of mixed low-level waste to the Tosca incinerator, and they've disposed of 1,800 cubic feet of outside legacy waste at the U landfill, and there was also an additional 466 cubic feet of outside legacy waste that went to Energy Solutions. One of the things, sorry, can you go back to that slide? One of the things that PRS has taken advantage of is utilizing super compacting. What they've done is they're able to take the waste and get a 6 to 1 volume reduction, and as a result, they're able to increase their shipping efficiency and reduce costs for disposal. As you may know, the disposal costs are typically on a volumetric basis. It does also additionally reduce extra handling and repackaging, and this is something we've begun using here at the site routinely in the last 4 months. Go ahead. Okay. What you see here is a slide showing the U landfill leachate treatment system. PRS is currently conducting the startup testing and training, preparing internal field review to document leachate treatment activities or readiness to start treatment. And what you can see is some details on the actual treatment system. I believe there was a more detailed presentation about a month ago or so that was laid out. Is that right?
I don't think I was here for that one, so it might have been.
You can go to the next one, please.
Gene.
Go ahead. Okay, and for our environmental projects, the groundwater operable unit, the Southwest Plume Site Investigation Report is currently under review by Kentucky and EPA, and we are continuing discussions regarding the TCE degradation factors used in our groundwater modeling, and we're working to complete the D1 proposed remedial action plan for the Southwest groundwater plume sources. The surface water operable unit, we're requesting a milestone extension for the submission of the site investigation risk assessment to Kentucky and EPA. We're looking to extend that to mid-October. Additionally, the burial grounds operable unit, the D2 remedial investigation feasibility study work plan is scheduled for submission to Kentucky and EPA at the end of month, and we're planning to begin field work as soon as we're able to come to agreement with Kentucky and EPA.
Okay. Questions or comments? John?
Well, I actually got several as we went along. I can read my own writing. The first one is, you presented a graphic showing the sampling locations around the 400 building. Is it possible that we could see added to that graphic the previous boreholes and monitoring wells and all of that sort of stuff? I mean, I was surprised you had that much room left.
Do we have a backup slide of that? Do we not? Is that the very? Here you go.
Is this showing all of them, or is this just the previous?
That, that's the previous.
And,
John, I want you to come up with other questions, see if he's got a slide for that too.
well, I've got a couple more. I mean, you know, that's a lot of monitoring to, I mean, how much, I guess the question is how much additional information are we getting from these new monitoring points, and at what cost?
I believe the additional sampling activities are being performed so we can optimize the heating and removal of the TCE, so.
I understood that, but how
Do you
much
wanna-
additional information are we getting, and at what cost?
Well, I'd have to get the cost. I've got that. If you give me a second, I have a breakdown of the cost for the whole project.
I mean, I was actually being facetious when I said I was surprised there was room for that, but, you know, clearly there's been a tremendous amount of monitoring, so, you know, the question, how much more are we gaining and how much does it cost? I think it seems reasonable.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, the sampling locations will be all at different heights, or, sorry, depths. So, I mean, I think there's additional information that's being gathered for the area where they're putting that treatment system in. It just may be that some of the sampling data that was gathered by these points wasn't sufficient to optimize. And what they're doing is the additional sampling information is being looked at in combination with the existing sampling data. It's not a new sampling activity that's essentially standing alone. So, I mean, they are, they've looked at the old data, identified areas where they felt there were weaknesses, where they would be able to get some efficiencies.
And it is a snapshot in time. I mean, that was a few years ago. I remember when we actually did this project, this investigation. I mean, that was back, I think, in the late 90s. And so it allows you to go in, take the historic data, come in, fine tune it. They were telling me it was about $2 million. I was thinking it was 1.5, but it's 1.5, $2 million to do that. But again, when you optimize, I mean, the long range, what you get in return is when you better define where it is, then obviously you're going to get more out of it. So, I mean, at the front end, you're trying to just nail down the spots of where that contamination is. And it does fill in the gaps. I mean, maybe where there's some gaps on the south side, maybe some borings didn't go to depth in some areas. Maybe they went shallower in some other areas, and this kind of helps us complete the picture. So.
My next question is, the rail spur that's being built, and this may have been information we received, I just can't seem to dredge it up. What is being carried on that rail line? I mean, what's going to be carried, and how often are the trains going to run on that line?
The oxide that's generated as a result of the conversion operations is what's going to be shipped from the conversion facility on that rail line. I'm not sure what the frequency of the shipments are, but
That'd be the
weekly
yellow cake
shipments.
you threw away.
Yes.
And that's going where? That's going to Nevada?
No, Nevada Test Site does not have a rail line to that facility. Anything going to the Nevada Test Site would have to be shipped via truck. The plans being looked at are to utilize Energy Solutions of Utah as a disposal site for that oxide.
Okay, and I'm sorry, but on the scrap metal project, you showed a number of those areas as being 100% completed. And my understanding was that there was some evidence or some suspicion or some level of a possibility that there are buried materials in those areas. And so in the areas that are 100% completed, have they done the investigation to see if there's any materials buried in those areas?
I believe that's a separate operable unit. And the scope
Yeah.
of the scrap metal removal project was to focus on removal of the surface level up scrap metal.
So you're not gonna start that subsequent investigation until some later time?
Right, what it is, you know, you remember in the Drum Mountain, obviously, there were some literal burial pits underneath that we can target. Under the other scrap yards, you've got maybe miscellaneous that would be in the soil just from being there, and that gets turned over to the soil operable unit, and it will be taken care of as part of the soils operable unit.
But one of the things that they are, I mean, it's not to say that something that has been pushed down into the soil isn't being looked for. They are going through those yards looking for scrap metal that had originally been placed into the yards and then perhaps has subsided.
Okay, now on the leachate treatment system, you talk about 2 solid filters. Are those paper filters? What are?
I believe they were carbon.
Well, you had activated charcoal also, but you talked about 2 inline filters for solids, and for suspended solids.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
There are 2 filters on that system. One is a 10 micron and one's a 50 micron filter, paper filters.
Paper filters.
Yes.
And then finally, one of the characteristics of a successful dissertation is coining a word, and I don't believe I've ever seen the word dispositioned before. I think you made it.
Very common word.
Yeah.
In DOE land.
Yes.
I'm sure that's a real word.
Alan.
Red flags it.
In talking about scrap metal, you indicated that there were 60 cars that were awaiting shipment.
Mhm.
Since last I recall, the unit train was 50 cars. What's it waiting on?
What we're waiting on is essentially money to make that shipment for disposal. I mean, that's the shipment is roughly, I want to say, 7 million, 8 million for disposal
The
costs.
disposal will be a little over 5.
A little over $5 million.
Where's the money coming from?
It's part.
Or is that being negotiated?
No. What I will
Cab
tell
budget.
you, what I will tell you is
Well,
that
we'll get on there.
the performance in the Northwest scrap yards, we have seen a significant acceleration of the removal activities. And so when the project was originally planned out, there was a certain volume that was planned for disposal this fiscal year and an additional volume that was planned next fiscal year. And so we've gotten ahead of ourselves with regard to the amount of scrap metal that we've processed, loaded, and prepared for shipment. Okay, so what we're doing is we're holding that last rail shipment to line up with our funding profiles.
Is it basically a cash flow issue?
It's the funding associated with disposal of that shipment will not be available until the beginning of the fiscal year.
Is that the same as the plus up?
No,
Money
it's
that's totally
just,
separate.
that's a separate issue.
So the money will not be available until beginning of the fiscal year, which will be end of September. How is anything gonna be shipped before then?
I don't believe we're planning on shipping those 60 rail cars until near the end of the fiscal year.
All right, Rhonda?
I had a question on the drilling probe that you had. You're saying that it saves waste. You don't have as much waste in back drilling. Kind of hinging on what Dr. Russell was saying, what kind of cost savings do you anticipate by changing the technology and not having to dispose of the waste? Is there a cost benefit for it?
$100 drums of waste.
Yeah, it's about 100 drums of waste.
Which is how much per drum?
Volume,
Dollars.
$12 for disposal.
Mhm.
Probably looking at 7.5 cubic feet times,
$24 a cubic foot? Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, 24.
What is that, a drum?
Which is how much a drum?
55 gallons.
How much do you pay a drum to dispose?
24 cubic foot times 7.5 cubic feet, so roughly $175
$175 per drum.
plus transportation.
Yeah.
So it's like,
$180 times 100.
So,
Okay.
That's
So- That's,
that's just
That's
disposal.
not the process to containerize.
Yeah, that's, once it's been containerized, those are the disposal costs. Okay, that would not include the transportation using a truck, that's roughly $5,000 to $7,000, a shipment, $100.
so was there a true cost benefit for changing technologies or?
yes,
Yeah.
sir.
I mean, what was it?
Waste, I
Yeah.
think, is the big thing that you have to handle.
Yeah, so the answer is,
Plus, you're not disturbing the
Soil as much, okay,
Drilling.
okay.
anybody else
That's
questions? Yeah, Bobby, and then I'll come to Jim.
Yeah, mine's just really not on the information you displayed, but are we,
Is it related to that?
are we planning on seeing Rachel at all, or is she no longer coming to meetings?
No, Bill and Rachel will continue to attend these meetings and to provide support. They're
Okay.
just both unavailable right now.
Jim?
Okay.
Something might help the presentation for the benefit of the community members, and I include myself in that. Through the presentation, you throw out so many 18,000 cubic feet. Nobody knows what that means. You throw out 200 tons. Nobody knows what that means. But if you could put it, say if you translate everything into, say, semi-trailer trucks, we all drive by those on the road every day. So you can say 20,000 tons in parentheses, 17 semi-trailer trucks. Now that means something. Now I can visualize that. But during, I mean, you throw out these numbers. I've been listening to them for several years, and I have no
Okay.
idea what that means. And I think other people could relate, could understand how much volume we're talking about.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, other board members, questions or comments about the presentation? Okay, thank you. Federal Coordinator?
Of course, Jim, you're actually asking DOE to actually speak English, so.
No.
That's, couple things mentioned. The National Chairs Meeting is coming up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's just in a few weeks. Due to some budget issues, I have talked to Rhonda about this a few days ago, that it looks like we're gonna have to limit it literally to one person going out there. And I've also been in discussions with the HI about that. That's kind of, I think, just be thinking about that. I know Rhonda has. That is coming up the week after Labor Day. Also, the 2004 Annual Site Environmental Report is out, the ASA report, 2004. I don't know if they've got a copy yet down here, but I know it is available to access, and we just need to get some copies down here for you. And I'd like to try to get a booklet, even the summary level stuff, at least into every CAB member's hands, if y'all can take care of that, Kim and Jeannie. So, well, that's good, that's good.
We don't have it yet, but we
Okay.
will.
All right, so we want to make sure we get that in your hands, and if need be, I'd like to get it in their hands without waiting until next month's meeting. If we can send it out to them at home, okay? So as long as we got everybody's home address, we'll send it there. That's all I've got right now.
Okay, ex officio?
First off, I was going to, on Dr. Russell, you're talking about the soils underneath the scrap yards. EPA, and I believe that Kentucky would say that they're also concerned about the level of contamination of those soils that are remaining in place. We just want to keep a close eye on them and determine whether they're leaching out, the surface water is washing them out into any of the drainages, or they're airily dispersing, because we just don't want to leave them in place if they're exceeding any high risk-based levels out there. So we will be keeping a close eye on that. And the scrap yards will have a removal action completion report, which is an enforceable document that's due in December of '07, I believe, or sometime like that. And so we'll probably be utilizing that to make sure that those soils are below any removal action. On the burial grounds OU document, we've kind of received informal assurances from the Department of Energy that they've addressed all of Kentucky's and EPA's comments. We're anxiously awaiting that, so that would be a great thing if those comments had been all addressed. We've gave a preliminary review to the FY 2006 site management plan. There were two primary issues, if I could boil it down, that EPA was concerned about. And those were that the dissolved phase plumes, that is the northeast and the northwest plumes, be brought back in, at least transparently, into the immediate program. Even though, I mean, it's being addressed by the C400 remedial action, and it also has active pump and treat systems on it. The way the previous site management plans had been written was that the dissolved phase plumes were going to be handled in comprehensive site-wide actions, soils actions, and things like that. So we wanted to pull that to almost of a separate action for dissolved phase plume, and DOE has done that, which I think it shows a great deal of progress as far as getting the SMP in the condition that we like it. Also, another concern of EPA's was that we were starting to run out of enforceable milestones as we're progressing through the program. And since Paducah is on the national priorities list, which comes under regulatory auspices of CERCLA and the National Contingency Plan, which is the implementing guidance for CERCLA or Superfund, states that all sites in the NPL should have a series of enforceable milestones in place to demonstrate progress towards cleanup. And so, our position is that we believe that there should be more enforceable milestones in place for Paducah that we can track progress. And DOE has replied that they're moving ahead with one enforceable milestone. We had asked for 3, and then we're going to continually talk about increasing the number of enforceable milestones, hopefully in the next site management plan, the draft of which is due in November. So we're making somewhat of progress on that. Another issue that is actually in regarding to the enforceable milestones is that, I don't know whether y'all are aware of it, and the site management plan for FY 2004 was the first one that was signed in 3 or 4, possibly 5 years. It had been somewhat at various levels of dispute, all the way up to EPA headquarters for a couple of years back and forth. And the FY 2004 was successfully signed by all parties, which was a great thing. But in signing the FY 2004 SMP, there was quite a new number of enforceable milestones, and the document had changed significantly from the development over the last couple of years. And so the site management plan is an appendix to the federal facilities agreement, which is basically our operating agreement for this whole site. And because of significant changes in the site management plan, there was consideration of whether we consider that a major modification or a minor modification. And traditionally there's there is some public involvement in a major modification. There's really no public involvement in a minor modifications. We do minor modifications all the time to the FFA. Every time an enforceable document is the due date is extended out, we consider that a minor modification. But there was consideration of what to do about a major modification. And referring back to the Federal Facilities Agreement, the Federal Facility Agreement states that the public involvement in a major modification should be addressed in the Community Relations Plan. And so that led us to look at the current Community Relations Plan. This went back about 1.5 years ago. And the Community Relations Plan had not been updated, and it had been out of date for a number of years. And so we set upon revising the Community Relations Plan. And that's something I don't think we've really talked about here, but we've been working for about the last year on putting together an active Community Relations Plan for the site. And and I think that we've pretty much come together on most of the issues between Kentucky and EPA and DOE on how that's going to be resolved. The one outstanding issue that is keeping us from having a final community relations plan is the degree of public involvement on major modifications, whereas EPA in Kentucky believes that there should be some period of public comment on major modifications. DOE is, I think that they're taking that into consideration. So there's some debate over the amount of public involvement on major modification, but hopefully we'll have that resolved in the next 2 months, I'm thinking, and we can have finally a final community relations plan in place for the site. Also, in regards to the environmental indicators, which we've talked about over the last several months, which had to do with the surface water area and the human exposures and groundwater exposures under control, there's still a great deal of attention at EPA headquarters because this is a Government Performance and Results Act. It's something that EPA has to report to Congress on a regular basis about whether these goals have been met. And the goals haven't been met for the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant, and so right now there's basically a great deal of pressure from EPA headquarters to do something about it, and Kentucky is working diligently with DOE and the Tennessee Valley Authority in reaching resolution of that issue.
John?
And,
I'm sorry, all the way down the end. I'll come back.
I may be somewhat confused, but I don't think so. As I recall, when the site management plan was finally, after all that dispute, it was finally developed and approved, that was an annual update to the Federal Facilities Agreement, and that it was due every September. And what we're looking at right now is the 2006, fiscal 2006. We are in the last month and a half of fiscal 2006. We don't have a site management plan update for that year, and apparently not going to get it. And now we're already shifted the 2007 to begin in draft form in November when it was due in September. It seems to me that if you want an enforceable milestone, it's to develop an annual update consistent with the fiscal year, which is September, which is October 1, September 30th, not 2 years, not, I mean, if we slide much further, I don't know where you're at. I mean, it simply doesn't make much sense after a while, and it doesn't seem to be that difficult that it should go month after month after month.
But isn't that the way that the FFA is written? That the current year site management plan, it might seem kind of strange, but the current year site management plan is, the draft is actually submitted in November of that fiscal year.
November 15th.
Does it?
Yeah.
November 15th.
The good news is the program doesn't shut down while we're trying to negotiate a site management plan, and that we continue the projects, we continue going through it. I mean, you're talking about a milestone is just trying to get something on a piece of paper that says we can enforce, it allows them to enforce DOE to meet that. But I mean, when I'm talking about actual physical activity and doing everyday business, I mean, it just continues on. It's just trying to capture the agreement and kind of general approach at which direction we're going.
Jim?
What does EPA mean when they recommend that the dispersed plumes be brought back into the program?
Well, brought back non-transparently or transparently into the program. I guess the way that the previous site management plans had addressed the dissolved phase plumes, which would be the northeast and northwest plumes, was in follow-up remedial actions or investigations that would be taken care of in the comprehensive site-wide OU and in the soils OU. And so we felt like that really wasn't a very transparent type of program about what was actually going to happen to address the dissolved phase plumes. And so we requested that those be brought back and actually make a separate category for dissolved phase plumes under the OU, groundwater OU. And so now that's the DOE has done that now in this site management plan.
Okay.
The strategy previously was it was going to be addressed, say in the C400 remedial action.
Mm-hmm.
You would take care of the source, and then hopefully, take care of spot sources and other, but it really didn't, it wasn't really transparent or clear about how the dissolved phase was to be handled in the long term after the C-400 action.
Okay, John, you commenting?
Yes,
on EPA?
well, I'm commenting to John. John, I don't think you got a full answer yet to your question. When, in November 15th, when we received the 2006 SMP, we had a period to review that SMP, and we did not complete our review until first part of the year. At that time, we identified some things in there that we knew were going to have to be resolved at several pay grades above our level. You know, what do we need to bring in more enforceable milestones? Some things like that. How do we deal with exactly what David Williams was talking about, the dissolve phase? Because the dissolve phase was under the soils operable unit. Well, that's a strange place to, and actually it was northwest and northeast dissolve, or plumes was under there. So the state of Kentucky and EPA both said we need to move this to a separate, back to the groundwater OU. There was a reason why it's in the soils OU, but we didn't agree with that anymore. It needed to be brought back into a separate, into the groundwater OU. So in order to get the senior management together, it took some length of time. Matter of fact, they just met on this issue last month. So it's been a painful, long time in coming, and usually our SMPs don't get delayed this late. I mean, they usually are done a little bit sooner than this, but there's several issues that are still in that SMP that just because our senior management met last month, we're still trying to resolve those internally as well as with DOE at this point. So it may not be a good answer, but it is the facts that have led us up to why we haven't approved that SMP at this time. But we just met with DOE today, and you know, unfortunately, we said, hey guys, you know, we kind of acknowledge that we're a little bit behind on this. We need to start talking about the 2007 SMP, and that's the, you know, we're trying to get actually 3 months ahead of talking about the 2007 SMP, and we acknowledge that we have not done our jobs completely yet.
Okay, other comments on the EPA issues? Anything else, John, from the state?
I don't have anything except that there were some questions that were received by the CAB, and last month I had told them if we would receive some questions of Division of Water or Division of Waste Management, Solid Waste Branch, that we would bring someone up to answer those questions. We were trying to resolve those questions. We kind of ran short of time, but Larry Souter with the KPS permit branch is here to serve the pleasure of the CAB board if they would like him to stay a little bit longer to answer any of those questions. He will do so. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Tim?
John and David, you already used all our time.
Thank you. Are there any questions about any of the presentations or comments from the public at this time?
Gary Vander Boegh. I brought up some of the issues of the KPDS permits over the last few months. And so I thought, John, you were going to bring Larry here to answer some questions or so. Is he available to answer some of those?
He is not available in this meeting. Until the committee has reached some resolution on those questions, we won't make that an agenda item for this board.
All right.
Can I make a comment here?
Sure.
I was asked before the meeting by our chair, Rhonda, to address some of those questions that we discussed at the task force meeting. And Jeannie is graciously, quickly trying to get those questions so other people can see them on display. So
Okay.
during the task force meeting, we'll be able to address some of those questions.
What? Run through that again, please.
There's a list of questions that I think now John and Gary and we talked about during the task force meeting. And you I don't know if you got them, Linda. They were sent to me by email.
I just passed them out.
Okay. So during the task force update, we can address a few of those questions. Really, John and Larry are gonna be addressing those.
You mean we can't listen to Mr. Vander Boegh?
That was Steve's response. As far as addressing these questions, they're gonna be during the task force.
It's the task, if the task force, in the task force presentation, if they are going to address those questions,
Are they
that's,
gonna answer them?
I don't know what they're going to do.
I'd rather hear Mr. Vander Boegh than the task force.
Well, no, he was looking for another gentleman to answer some questions, right?
And
Well-
he is here.
No,
Okay.
No, the other gentleman is here, and I
Okay.
heard somebody say that he's here to answer questions about the KPDS issues. So I just said, every time in the past we brought that up, somebody in the audience has popped up, DOE's asked him to come forward, so if he's an ex officio member or whoever.
Okay, let me just clarify.
Okay.
Right now, it's appropriate for any member of the public to raise questions or make comments. The issue of the response to these, the set of questions that was raised last time, my understanding is that the task force invited one or more people to address these questions with them.
Okay.
And I want to wait until their presentation to see what they have to say, rather than have that out of order at this point.
That's fine, I just misunderstood it, so they will get back to the board. Okay. The other thing, I'm just gonna run down a lot of written questions here, or comments. On May 11th, the KDWM received, or sent a letter to Mr. Jack Ray, and where there were kids actually swimming and playing in Little Bottom Creek. And that warning explained to them that there were excessive levels of uranium in that creek, or above background, I think is the way they presented it. But how would this affect the GIPRA status for DOE? And maybe Reinhardt, I'm just going to direct it at you, and if the ex-officio members want to jump in, I guess that's fine. But I understand this is all the child recreator scenario, the second worst case situation that you just experienced on May 11th. The first being if they were out there drinking the water. And I don't know how many kids are out there swimming in it, but if they were swimming and playing in that stream, surely one of them took a drink. And if that stream's contaminated with transuranics.
Okay, I think we understand what the question
Okay.
is. Is there someone who's prepared to answer that at this point, or is that a question that needs to be brought back?
Do you want to answer that, John? Is this what you were talking about in the other room?
If you don't mind, I can answer it.
Yes.
It was a letter that was generated by my section that was sent
To Mr. Ray. We received an anonymous tip that there were not necessarily kids out there playing in the stream, but there was a rope that it appeared that people were swinging out into the water and playing in the water, and there was a bench out in Little Bayou Creek. Well, who plays on swings out in the water? You assume it's kids, but we never actually saw any kids playing in the creek, but that's immaterial. You can only assume that kids are out there playing. And that is the scenario that we look at most often. It's one of the most protective scenarios for people that use that area, is the child recreator scenario. Now, you've got a couple questions in there, Gary. We went out there on the 10th of April, and I've got a copy of the letter. If you all would like a copy of the letter on the cab, we're more than willing to share that with you. We went out there on the 10th. We were not able to locate it, the area that was reported to us. We went back on April the 13th, and we were able to locate where the swing was. And we believe it to be on DOE property. So it's property that's owned by Department of Energy. It's just not on private property. We did send this letter to DOE as well. We CC'd them. And we went to the closest neighbor that we thought maybe might be using this area, and that was Mr. Ray. And we talked to Mr. Ray, and he assured us that it wasn't him or none of his family was using that. So we went ahead and sent a letter to him just to inform him about some postings that were, and I think we said maybe a quarter mile or half a mile upstream toward the facility, up a half a mile upstream from Ogden Landing. To give you an idea, and I wish I had a map, Ogden Landing Road and Little Bayou Creek, where they intersect, if you go north towards the Ohio River, about a half a mile, that's where the property is located, up in that area. But we sent a letter to Mr. Ray, and we just told him that we have documented levels of uranium that are above background levels, and we would advise anybody from recreating in that stream in that area. And like I said, you're welcome to have a copy of the letter, and we just wanted him to be aware of the signs that are posted at Ogden Landing Road.
Did you ask a second question of how would it affect the GIPRA?
Yes.
And then a second
Well,
question.
and let me say one more thing. If I understand it correctly, that creek is not fenced, so there could be a party out there, and I've heard there has been kids from the high school going out and swimming and actually swimming in this thing quite often. People have seen them there. Who's blocking them right now while we're having this meeting? And if that's one of the most contaminated ditches DOE's got at the site, which, it's got the transuranics, and I can ask Reinhardt to explain which ones are there most prevalent. I brought up, if you remember, the TCE seeps coming out, and that's either, John, is that upstream or downstream? I'll let you answer that. But I guess my point is, it's DOE property. It's the worst case, it's the second worst case scenario under risk assessment. David, I just wanted David to know it, because if you're talking about DOE's program not being approved because of various issues that relate to risk assessment, this looks like, to me, it was kind of a second worst case scenario that somebody should be out there either sampling or fencing the creek.
I'll try to, you got several questions there. One question is who's out there stopping the kids? No one's ever stopping the kids. You can put a sign up and the kids usually walk around the sign if they're gonna get in the creek. There is no signs in that area at this point. How does it affect the GIPR process? What we did was we went in and looked at all the data that's in the Oak Ridge Environmental Information System, ORIS database, and we looked at transuranics, we looked at the different uraniums, we looked at PCBs, we looked at metals. The state of Kentucky did all that, and we measured it against risk-based numbers for that stream. And the only risk-based numbers that were above background levels, which is what our letter said, was for uranium. So that's why, we issued the letter stating what it says to Mr. Ray. The intent of what we're wanting to do for the EI, for the GIPRA, is to inform the public a little more about if we do find elevated levels, which we have seen, some areas with, or some samples with elevated levels of uranium, is to maybe put out more signs to educate the public so we don't have this kind of a situation occurring again. So that's what we're looking at doing is actually putting out more signs in that area to inform. And I'm not accusing Mr. Ray of going out there and swimming. I don't know, but I just wanted to educate people like that may be going in that area, or the kids that go out in that area that may not actually see a sign out there.
Well, what's troubling about all of this to me is I'm a recreational user of that area, and my activities have been significantly restricted and curtailed in that area because of the security concerns around the DOE plant. Now, I predict what's going to come from this is they're going to beat up on the field trial people some more and say, well, what the hell, you've been riding your horses across this swing and you're going to have to quit going through there, or some crazy thing, because apparently the only people who are restricted are the people that ride a horse through. It's remarkable to me that these kids are going, we are not allowed in there except when we're running a field trial and only after we jump through a lot of hoops to identify who we are by name and address, and subjected to some, some fairly, it's incredible. And so we find the fence is cut, people are out there swimming, having a high old time, and we're spending $15 million on security. Good Lord.
Rhonda.
But they'll shoot my horse, I guess.
I have a concern that you're saying that the water out there is contaminated and the children have access to it. There are signs telling them not to play or dally in the water. But isn't there a law somewhere that says a sign is not enough protection for a child, that it would require fencing? A child is not held accountable for the reading of a sign until the age of 18, I think.
We're not saying that, You know, first off, there's not been a study that's been done out there of the entire length of Little Bayou or Bayou Creek. But there have been some sample points that are routinely collected by the Division of Waste Management through the University of Kentucky, as well as DOE. And we do see some elevated levels of uranium in the sediment out there that do exceed I know these numbers may not mean a lot to you, but 10 to the minus 6 risk, you know, it's a 1 in a million risk, but they don't exceed a level that would be like a 10 to the minus 4 risk. That's a 1 in 100,000 risk. So we see a range that Kentucky would allow risk management. You're allowed to go out and manage risk, but there are certain requirements that have to be put in place. And that's the path that we have chosen. The state of Kentucky is to put signs up to inform the public. Now, I don't know about the law that you mentioned, and I would like to hear more about that. But
If you work for the state, they should know.
well,
My
I'll be
mother's
asking.
ornamental pond is filled in because we couldn't fence it to keep neighbors' children out of it.
So, but that's the path that we have chosen to try to, you know, we're wanting to tell the public, give them more information about what potentially could be out there. And the nature of a sediment sample is, some of these samples we've looked at are 5 years old. So more than likely, if I were to go out and sample that sediment again, it's transient. It's probably not there anymore. So it may have, you know, that's moved on downstream, or it may have been replaced by another level of uranium that could be of concern. We don't have enough information to positively say the creek is contaminated. We just don't know. So we're trying to be as protective as we can.
Okay. You have more questions, comments?
Well, I guess it goes back to maybe John can figure this one out, check the rules on the fence there, and at the same time, I was kind of curious, why wouldn't they be DOE signs? Why are you doing the signing? Wouldn't they be DOE needing to rope off their property? Because I sure couldn't do that on my property if I had a contamination issue. And really, I don't know who the kids are, but you're gonna find out who the kids are when they start calling in with various cancers or anything
Well,
else that we hear.
Yeah, we don't need to speculate about
I
results.
think it's a fair question. It won't be the state of Kentucky, Gary, that put up the signs. It would be
Okay.
Department of
Would be
Energy.
DOE.
And they would be responsible for maintaining those signs and ensuring those signs
Okay,
stay in
well,
place.
I guess that's what I'm confused. Yeah, the other issue, John has provided me with FOIA requests, and I'll tell everybody, John and Maria Woods provided some great FOIA information, including the letter that I just provided John Russell. The FOIA request for the analytical data for Big Bayou and Little Bayou Creek came in. I was going to ask John if he could explain maybe some of the PCB levels, because it just came in yesterday and it's quite lengthy, and rather than me trying to dig out for a month or two and not, you know, be able to share this with everybody, I just thought John could summarize if there's any health issues in the PCB realm and some of the RAD issues that are in the data there.
Well, we submitted you almost 10 years of data, and offhand, that's probably over 10,000 samples that have been
Don't ever
collected.
hit the print
So,
button, in other words.
No, I'm not comfortable telling you what's in all those samples offhand, but I do know, I've looked at all of that data throughout the years, and what I remember is no samples are above for PCBs in the fish in FDA action level in Little or Big Bayou Creek. The action level for PCBs is 2 parts per million. Now, I can say that some of the samples in the fish that we have seen for both Little Bayou and Big Bayou Creek are above the Great Lakes protocol for PCBs. And there's different numbers, and I won't quote those numbers because I don't remember them offhand, for consumption of fish for pregnant women or for children. We do see those, but we have a difficult time when we go out there collecting fish to get the 3 trophic. What happens is you have 3 agencies in the state of Kentucky that require you to go out and collect 3 different trophic levels of fish. You have to get a top carnivore, a medium, and a bottom carnivore. An example would be a sunfish, a spotted bass, or a smallmouth bass, or you'd have to also get a catfish. And we have a very difficult time collecting sizable pan-sized fish of all three trophic levels out there. But we do see the middle and the upper trophic level, the bass and the green sunfish or bluegill, different, or long-eared sunfish. We do see them, 5 to 6 inches long, and that's the size that we routinely see above a Great Lakes protocol for PCB.
And that matches Dr. Bird's study of the PCB levels that he published?
That's actually where
That's where you're getting it from. All right, I received that. The other thing is, after the article came out, I guess it was in the paper the following, and I think Bobby brought it up, that Joe Walker was going to be doing a story on some of the various issues of leachate treatment facility and whatnot. There were numerous people call me and ask me if I knew about some off-site contamination issues, and I was quite shocked and surprised at hearing what I heard, and that basically they were referring to DOE maps that maybe, Reinhardt, you're kind of the new guy here on site, but Dave, you could probably answer this. The maps that you all passed out at Heath High School, those were the maps that identified off-site DOE waste that had been trucked outside and dumped out in the community. Were you aware of those maps that you passed out?
No, I don't even think I was there. That was several years ago. I don't think I was there at that meeting what you're talking
How
about.
far back do you go?
I'll go back longer than that, but I don't recall that.
I was at that meeting.
I was not there.
I don't remember a map showing things that had been trucked out. I remember a
There
map
was maps
showing
about
DOE
any
disposal.
detects over background levels was what I can remember.
Can you still get that map and maybe share it with the cab? Because I can't really show you where I was told this large landfill is, but if you had that map, and it was apparently published by CNN or something.
I don't think we're aware of any landfill that's.
Well, it might not have been called a landfill, it's gonna be called an illegal dump, probably, but you won't find it permitted, but I think it ended up on a DOE website somewhere, and a party had contacted, or actually searched it and actually got a call from the FBI to get off that website. It was off the property, well off. So probably you don't know anything about it?
Yeah, I think if you get some specific
Okay.
information.
If you can,
we
I'd
may ask
appreciate a
about-
copy of it. Maybe, does anybody in the audience remember anything such as a?
I do, excuse me.
Well, could I,
Just
I'm not,
just a minute.
I got one more thing.
I'll be
Okay,
glad to.
Well, I just-
okay, we're well over time for public comment,
Okay.
so.
But I think
keep it
John got
brief.
a lot of my time there too, so. And the leachate treatment facility, I understand DOE sampled the leachate for radionuclides on what, Reinhardt, Monday? This is what was in the follow-up to the news article in the Courier Journal about Tom Fitzgerald's
I don't believe-
successful challenge of the leachate treatment
I
facility.
don't believe we performed the sampling for the leachate treatment system. Is that
They got
correct?
approved for it, but I didn't say
Well,
it was done.
there was a WPSD story that DOE was going out to sample leachate, so that was,
The WPSD.
TV station.
Okay.
okay.
We haven't sampled the leachate from the new leachate treatment system yet.
Yeah. Well, if you needed to sample or get the background, you've got the quarterly report. Mr. Korpstein's here, so he's got all the quarterly reports with those analytical data points that I've shared with quite a few people anyway, so you might look at that first. I'm just gonna give you that heads up.
Thank you.
Steve, can I make one brief comment?
Yep.
That several times in Gary and John's discussion, I heard mention of a fence relating to this swing in the creek thing a couple times. That site is on Department of Energy property. There is no fence between private property and where that swing is. The only fence that exists is the fence on the private property side of the line. That boundary is currently marked by signs every 100 yards saying, "This property is closed." I want to get that clear.
Okay.
There's no fence that on DOE property that's been cut at that location. However that came into it is incorrect.
Okay. Thank you. John?
This John or you? Okay, me. Gary Vander Boegh has contacted me and told me that there are private dumps on property outside of DOE property that contains material brought from the gaseous diffusion plant. you know, I will invite anybody in the audience, as well as anybody in the cab, if you have that information, please send it to me, and we will go out and take a look at it. I've already talked to my management and cleared that with them, and we will go out and take a look at it. We will evaluate if there's anything that visual that we can tell that's out there, as well as with some rad meters and things like that. And if we feel like there is, you know, merit to what I'm being told, we will investigate that further.
Okay.
So if you're not comfortable talking to DOE about it, please contact us, and you will be right there with us when we go on the investigation.
And let me clarify, I'm not sure it exists either, so what I'm trying to do is find out if it's on your map. We won't waste your time. If you got the map, and then I'll give that when I get a map, I'll be able to compare it. So if it's not on your map, that means there's.
Well, I don't have that map either.
Well, maybe we can get it. Okay.
Yes.
We'll share it next meeting.
Please.
Other public comments and questions, and we need to keep, as I said, we're well over time on public comments and questions. If you have comments, keep them brief. If you have questions, we may not be able to go into them in depth at this moment, but we'll note them.
Steve, one quick, this gentleman here said that he had information. If you were not able to share it tonight with the public,
I'll be leaving for flying out Saturday morning.
Well, I'm going back to Frankfurt also, but I'm willing to meet you outside if you want to talk to me about it.
Sir?
Yes, I'm Dr. Clinton Cook. I'm a practicing GYN cancer surgeon. And if I could, I'd like to take a few minutes of your time and explain a little bit from a medical standpoint what we consider the hazards around this state and some of the two hot spots, which are eastern Kentucky and radiation exposure from western Kentucky. I trained in Louisville. Yes.
You said, how lengthy are your comments going to be?
5 minutes.
Then I
Very
need to
short.
ask the board if they're interested in having that on the agenda, or if you want to hear those comments at this time. Is this an item that you would?
Didn't we cancel the site management plan talk?
Yeah, it's canceled.
I'm asking the board what you'd like to do. If you want to hear, my concern is that we've got a certain amount of time allocated, we're well over it. If there are going to be lengthy comments or questions or conversations, we can either hear them now if the board wants to, or we can slate them on as agenda items so that we know that we're prepared to talk about them.
This will not be a lengthy conversation. This
I'm
is
asking-
data collection from a medical standpoint
Okay.
on the cancers in this region. Okay, and I'll
So
be
it's-
glad to discuss that.
Let me just check. I want to see what the board's pleasure is.
Want to
Rhonda,
hear it? Yes, we want to hear it.
please
Okay,
proceed.
thank you. I trained at the University of Louisville, medical school, trained in Atlanta, and had 2 years of cancer surgery at Emory University, and trained also at MD Anderson in Houston as an advanced senior fellow for the NIH. I practiced in Louisville for 31 years. I had a very high referral practice around the state, and certainly from this part of the country with Dr. Harry Carlos and some other physicians here, because I do radical cancer surgery and gynecologic surgery. I've been a member of the KMA State Cancer Committee for some 20 years. I chaired it for 9 years. And we collect the data from this area and all over the state, and we provide that to the National Institute of Health data collection base. It's interesting that because chronic exposure here of depleted uranium, there are many cancers related to that we are monitoring now very carefully. And all the statistics are being gathered, and that some of them that are coming out are going to be quite interesting. As you all know, that when radiation gets into the body on depleted radiation, it either comes in orally and goes into the lung or down into the stomach. All of the radiation that comes in, radioactivity goes through the stomach. Even if it comes in the lung, it's transferred over to the stomach, and then it's stored into the liver. The fastest growing cells in the body are the ones that are affected most, and the slowest reproducing cells are the ones that are least affected, such as the brain. But right now, we're monitoring leukemia, thyroid cancers, brain cancer, bone cancer, breast cancer, skin cancer, stomach cancers, lung cancers, and birth defects. And again, This is going to be monitored very carefully, and the NIH is going to be monitoring very carefully. So if there are radioactive spills down here, and we have health risks that were just discussed, this is very, very serious for the population of this area. I want you to know that. Yes.
As they're watching the results, will you have something compiled as far as a report that you could maybe come back and present as an agenda item for us?
I'd be glad to. The data is being collected and then summarized by the Martie Foundation at the University of Kentucky and also by the Brown Cancer Foundation in Louisville.
And what kind of time frame is that going to be available?
It'll be available as we see what evolves here with what appears to be some radioactivity that is outside the bounds of your plant.
So maybe next spring you may have something you could share with us, or is that too soon? Okay.
It could well be, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. That John, then this John.
Recently, and I think it was last week, there was an article in the Courier Journal about Gulf War and Iraqi War veterans who are reporting a high incidence of health effects that they are attributing to exposure to depleted uranium, not necessarily the radioactive aspect of that, but simply the uranium aspect of that. That apparently the uranium aspect, uranium as an element, has some health risk associated with it that are perhaps not well understood, at least from the standpoint of that article. Is your study going to eliminate that in any way? Because I think for us, we have suggestions that we have uranium as an element substantially outside the security fence, and we have radioactivity outside the security fence. And so we have both of those issues at hand.
Well, I would say that there are some cancers going to be hard to identify, whether, such as lung cancer, whether that's going to be caused by cigarette smoking or whether there's any radiation effect to lung cancer. But there are other cancers that have no effect by such as smoking that's directly related to, can be related to radiation injury. And the most common one is bone marrow, the hemopoietic system, because those cells are the ones that are reproducing themselves the fastest, and they're the ones where the radiation activity is the highest, and therefore the leukemia rate is going to be going up. And so there's been a suggestion by other folks around that this is a hot spot for a lot of those type injuries. Not the acute exposure, but the chronic exposure.
But again, the issue that I'm concerned about
these are malignancies. So.
Uranium as an element, is it carcinogenic? And are you going to be able to look at that issue, that issue in addition to the issue of the radiation as a carcinogenic agent?
No, that committee will not do that.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
One more question. You do know we have some available spots on our board.
Yes, ma'am.
And we have a great need for somebody from the healthcare community.
Well, it looks like we do. I appreciate you saying that, because it looks like they want to get me off here pretty quick.
No. We'll keep you here.
Well, I thank you, and I appreciate that.
We'll send you an application.
I came a pretty good distance just to see y'all.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Sure.
Sit down. How are you getting out your message to the public, where if someone in the public has cancer, how does everyone around the facility or in this region know to contact you so you can either obtain their medical records, talk to them to find out?
Excellent point. We, in fact, I helped develop some years ago. We send videotapes out to all physicians in all counties of Kentucky. And we send that also now as a prototype to other states too, because we led the way on that. And we try to give other physicians first the knowledge of what to look for, how to report it. The database must be complete, And that's already been done to all the family physicians, the expert physicians, the ones that do more or do higher risk type medicine. And also that data is now made available, such as breast cancer, other forms of cancer, melanomas, whatever, to the general public. And that's done through various state regulatory groups around the state.
If someone locally has cancer that wants to seek someone, a physician in St. Louis or Nashville,
yes,
how would you pick up those people that are traveling out of state and they're no longer, you know, or let's say they wanted to go to their physician out of state? How do you pick up those cancer patients that bypass the local physicians that know how to fill out the forms and to contact you?
If the biopsy has been made here and there's histology here, evidence under the microscope, then that's added to the database. The treatment plan is what you're talking about. Treatment plan can be made anywhere. But when the biopsy is made, then that goes into the database. It's staged and goes into the database.
That usually is done locally if a person.
Yes, that's correct. That's collected then by the state, comes through the State Cancer Committee, okay, which I've chaired for years. And then it goes to the Martie Foundation, to the Brown Foundation in Louisville, and then directly to the NIH. NIH is very interested in this, but they want specific details. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Y'all know my name is George Johnson. I'll take about 10 seconds, and what I want to do is thank this man for having enough interest and concern in this community to come forward and speak. He is a very close friend of Mitch McConnell, for those of you that don't know, and I'm sure that word will get back to Mr. McConnell about his treatment here and the way he was accepted to present his 5 minutes. I hope he does, because this is part of the problem in this area. We want to close our ears to real fact and real interest to people, and that's the health of this community. We don't care about your system of order, but we do want to get word out to people, and this will go directly to the senator, and he will tell him all of the information that was presented here.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, I appreciate your concern, and I think everybody here voted to listen to Dr. Cook, and we have been looking for somebody from the healthcare community. We are all volunteering here, and I appreciate the fact that Senator McConnell is interested in what we're doing, though I've never seen him. I would appreciate if you extend to him an invitation to come.
Oh, I have. And I've extended an invitation to Senator McConnell to let me sit down and talk with him personally about what I know about this facility and how it's been operated. And there will be a day when I'll get to do that.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sir.
On a different note, and very briefly, my name is Steve Miners. As you all may know, Eric Scott is no longer a member of the Radiation Health Branch, and I believe a letter was sent over to this board to let them know that Eric would no longer be representing the Radiation Health Branch, that Steve Hampson will be attending these meetings in that capacity in the future. Steve was to be here this evening but had to return home, and so I'm here to represent him. If you all have any questions or comments that I can share back with Steve, I'll be happy to carry those back.
Thank you. You're losing them. Go ahead.
I'll interrupt. I hope I'm not. My name's Ron Fowler. In question to the maps and location, they were handed out at 2000, I believe, 2 at the Heath High School. Ms. English was present when they were handed out. They were handed out by the Department of Energy and Don Seaborg under my request for a community meeting. If Ms. English graciously helped me with it. It didn't pinpoint only radiological hazards off-site. It wasn't dump sites. It was different points of interest. It had other things such as TCE. I brought this up to Mr. Seaborg and others. I said, what we've done now is given the national terrorists a smorgasbord. They can take little sandboxes out now and pick up the plutonium and whatever we have. Of course, it won't be an atomic weapon, but it could be a dirty bomb. I've heard no more about it. Mr. Jim Malone put it in the Courier Journal on a Sunday. He has explicit maps. If you'll go back to the archives, you can find that in there. In reference to the postings that we were talking about earlier, I think, and Mr. Miners might have left now. No, Steve, can you post anything for a radiological worker if they haven't been trained? Don't they have to be trained?
I'm sorry, can you address your questions
I'm
and your
addressing it
comments
to
to the
everyone,
board?
sir. I was asking Mr. Miners.
I
You
understand.
have to also train individuals if there's a posting as to what that posting means. That's radiological workers. The restrictions under 10 CFR 835, Department of Energy's own regulations, is even more stringent for the worker, not worker, but the public. If no one's been trained on this, how can an individual be held responsible? It is a mediocre joke. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the public at this time? If not, I'm going to suggest a brief break before we go into the land acquisition study update, if that's okay with the board. Take 5 minutes, we'll come back. We're up to the land acquisition study update.
Yeah, we don't have a presentation to support that. Essentially, status of that is a draft report has been submitted to the Lexington office for review, and I believe they are drafting a draft letter to go to the congressional committee specifying that the project is moving forward on schedule.
Okay, and the people from UK, whoever?
KRCE.
KRCE.
I saw him here.
I thought that the expectation was that they were going to report, but that's basically you're reporting on their behalf for just a status update?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, questions, comments? John?
Well, I'm always interested, at what point are we gonna get a chance to, are we gonna see the report after it's been vetted by everybody in America, and so the last people to see it is the advisory committee, and we get to say, okay, that's the report, or are we gonna see it before that point?
In the original presentation, when they gave us the timeline, we were going to see it after it was done and submitted. And we made an additional request, Rachel made a request to KRCEE, because I raised the question, it was raised during that meeting, to move the timeline up a month before the final report was due. So if we wanted to review it and make a recommendation or take note of something before the final draft was signed and submitted to DOE, and they have agreed to do that. I think it was due in September. We were expecting it tonight, some kind of update, but for September, certainly before it's submitted to DOE for final approval, we'd like to see just for commentary.
Okay.
And if I might comment, we got one of these things one time where we came to the meeting, there it is, and then we were asked to comment on it. And I'm sorry, but that's not sufficient. If there's a draft report out there, make it available. This isn't national security. We're not gonna be terrorist attacks on downtown Paducah if somebody sees this report. So let us see it. I think that's fair.
Okay.
I can't advise you otherwise.
Anybody else? Question, comment? Rhonda?
No.
Okay. Waste disposition, water quality.
I was late for 1 minute and I missed the whole update on land acquisition. Okay, well, we met earlier this evening, the Waste and Water Quality Task Force. We had 2 agenda items, the land use maps and some landfill issues. So the land use maps, I was kind of sorely disappointed that there's been no progress on what was requested from DOE to prepare some GIS data that was given about 4 months ago. So I volunteered to give a list rather than it being in paragraph form, just trying to speed this process up because it's been a good 4 months. So that is the status of that. Basically, we got no progress for a month. On a positive note, since it's been such a negative series of notes here, is that David Williams provided me a PowerPoint presentation to review on a different federal facility. I guess it's a base of some sort.
Navy base, Cecil Field.
And it's basically an economic development plan. And it's somewhat inspiring to see that a community could get together and have cooperation amongst different organizations and individuals and have a plan. And David could briefly discuss this more if you're interested, or if the CAB would like to actually see this PowerPoint presentation. So does anybody have a question for David?
Well, I mean, I can just briefly tell you what I gave Bobby. It's part of most of our federal facilities. One of the primary goals is ready for reuse, and so almost every facility is required to have a reuse plan by some entity, usually the controlling federal agency like the Department of Defense or Department of Energy. And Cecil Field Naval Base is a huge naval base in Jacksonville, and they were going under partial closure, and so they started developing this back in about 93, 94. Is that they established the local reuse authority, and through interaction with the reuse authority and the Restoration Advisory Board, which is the same as the CAB, and the EPA and the state and the Department of the Navy, they developed a long-term reuse plan, and it's in a GIS-based format where they have the various properties outlined and and what the projected reuse of that property would be. And that acted as a blueprint for how the property was to be cleaned up. Say if a property was supposed to be used continually as industrial, the cleanup levels were about 10 to the -4. If it was going to be residential, 10 to the -6, or daycare and various other aspects like that. So it acted as a blueprint for the reuse of the facility. So I haven't really, I tried to get Bobby this about a couple of days ago, and it wouldn't get through her email system, so I sent it, had it copied into a CD format for, I guess, for you to look at, and then maybe next month we can go over it if you'd like.
Okay, so we can discuss it in the work plan a little bit later amongst the CABs. So moving on to the second agenda item on landfill concerns. John Russell, probably 3 cabs ago, maybe 2, had talked about writing a recommendation in response to some of the landfill issues that have been brought up primarily by the public, but also questions that the CAB has had internally. So I just passed around a recommendation. You consider it. Jim Smart worked on it during the task force meeting as well as Alan. And I'd like the other CAB members to respond to this recommendation as far as whether the full CAB would like to present this to DOE or whether we would like to ruminate on it more, or I'll leave it open to the other CAB members.
Let me suggest that we treat this as a proposal, a proposed recommendation, and ask for questions and comments, ask for concerns, and then deal with the question of whether people need more time to think about it or whether they're ready to take action. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, this is a proposal, recommendation that would go to DOE. Questions or comments about it? John?
I have one question. When you, at the very bottom here where it says DOE regulator, state regulator, there's a lot of different state regulators. Do you want someone from the solid waste branch that is responsible for writing the permit? Do you want somebody that has the ability to do inspections at the landfill, like a field office inspector? Or do you want someone from the Division of Water that would work on like the KPDS permit? So I just don't know which state regulator you're wanting, and I need to go ask my management, is it okay to have that person on the committee?
Well, we just, this is a recommendation for DOE, and they would, when we're recommending they set up this committee, and they would decide, you know, what's the appropriate, and working through y'all would work, decide who's the appropriate office to handle it. I would.
May I ask a question? What's the driver or the what you feel is the issue that needs to be resolved that drove this particular recommendation or proposed recommendation?
There's been a number of issues raised about what is going into the landfill, you know, what is the leachate going to be coming out of the landfill, and the CAB would like to more fully understand the issues and whether there's merit to any allegations of misuse, really. So rather than month after month hearing a similar story, we would like just to get it resolved.
Well, Dave was just making a suggestion. I was kind of thinking along the same lines myself. It would seem that, you know, a presentation of the overall waste generation and characterization process might be appropriate. We can provide a briefing to you all here on how that process works. I mean, we don't have generators that are out there that are just generating waste and then throwing it in the back of a pickup truck and hauling it to the U landfill. I mean, it's a very controlled process. There are detailed characterization procedures. There are waste certifying officials that review the packages. There are inspections and sampling activities that are done for each of the containers as they are prepared for disposal on the on-site landfill. There are landfill packages that are developed that have the waste stream characterization information that's developed based on process knowledge and actual sampling data.
Can I interrupt here?
Sure.
I don't think the full CAB is interested in learning the full procedures. So that would be why we are recommending to have basically a committee set up that would include DOE, state regulator, CAB member, and you would work within that environment.
Well, I mean, in reading your recommendation, you're doing more than that. You know, you're recommending strict adherence to our waste acceptance criteria, okay, which would appear to me that you're insinuating or have some belief that we're not adhering to our waste acceptance criteria, okay, and you've got specific language in your recommendation talking about oversight programs. I mean, there is a very robust oversight program both on the contractor side and on the federal side that does look at waste characterization and disposal operations, and not just for the U landfill, but for waste that goes off-site to the Nevada test site and to energy solutions. And when issues are identified in the field, they are tracked and programmatic corrective actions are developed and documented in their QA program. Okay, so I'm a little concerned that you're proposing a recommendation without getting the information from us.
Okay, Dave?
I was going to say, I was actually going to kind of say some things in the other meeting, but it's hard to get a word in edgewise at times. So here's what I was going to offer, Bobby, I think, to the group, Jim, and see what you think about this. Let this go until the next meeting. Allow us to bring a landfill person in, okay? Because here's what's happening. You're seeing a lot of statements made at these meetings. Some of them, I don't even know if they're true or not, half true, whatever they are. Some completely, whatever it is. There's things in the newspaper. And then there's, at times, I'm not over the landfill personally, so it's hard sometimes for me to try to answer on the spot, answer questions. I mean, it's just, that is not my thing. I would like to bring, and this is what was occurring to me when we were in the last meeting, I would like to have John come himself and bring the main landfill person who can come in over that whole area, that can say, and go through a presentation to the task force and say, here's what we do in these areas. And then if there are deficiencies that you see, then to follow that up and say, the recommendation is, you need to enhance in this area. We got a problem over here. We think you ought to do thus and such. We've never done that. And it's because we've just never had somebody there at the task force. And I would like the opportunity to let the site bring some people who are expertise there, that work there, to make that presentation to the task force and to answer a lot of these things where there's questions, like how we deal with the criteria of what waste goes in, what kind of monitoring programs, the checks and balances that go in, things coming in, going out, whatever it might be. And we've never had that. And I think that warrants a good discussion in light of everything that's been said. But I would just like the opportunity to do that because we just never had the opportunity to do that. And that may help answer a lot of questions.
I'm good, Alan and then Jim.
At least I hope it would help anyway.
One of the things that came up in the task force meeting was that simply having a program on paper isn't really sufficient. We'd like to see how it's implemented.
And that's a part of that. I mean, you're getting somebody in there who can tell you, this person checks, this is what he looks at, this is what she looks at, every day, this is the frequency, this is what goes on. Because I think what there is, and even on my part, is a lack of knowledge just on the general day-to-day operation of that landfill. How is it conducted? It's easy to throw a lot of stuff out there in meetings and papers and everything, but I mean, we've got to get where people can tell you, and me, that are knowledgeable day in, day out, and say, this is how we operate it. This is how we do it. Now, when you look at inspections, they could talk about who's doing the inspecting and the frequency. Here's how we know what goes in there, and this is how we inspect. Okay, not to come in and give you just a, paper shuffle and say, well, this is what it says, but this is what we do. Somebody who's knowledgeable. We've never had that, and I'm asking the CAB to allow us at the task force level to maybe next month make that the task force presentation, because it is the biggest issue. It was, I think, today. And I'll let somebody come in and maybe answer that, and then if you feel there's still deficiencies, then go from there.
Jim.
So, Reiner, maybe this needs to be reworded somewhat, but I think the CAB has confidence, the DOE is adhering to the waste acceptance criteria. We had some concern the fact that we got new subcontractors coming on board, PRS, and we wanted to make sure the transition period goes smoothly. And we're not telling you how to do your job, we're just recommending that, extra emphasis be given to that. And the second part, Dave, is that yeah, we can have these presentations made in the task force, but I think the problem is, we are the eyes and ears of the community. We have a responsibility to the community, and even though we may understand and we get these presentations, there's been a lot over the past several weeks, a lot of issues being raised, and a lot of, I don't know if it's anger, but a lot of concern from the community, and I think it'd be worthwhile to go down and list these concerns and address them specifically. Because otherwise, we're going to go in there, the task force members, and we listen to it and we feel good about it. Meanwhile, some of the other community members, it's not going to satisfy them. They're going to say, oh, this CAB, they don't listen to us, and they don't. I think it's important if we list these items and make that public so that, and whatever things they bring to us, we can also bring forward for this review committee.